Now, we are approaching that time of year when the dark nights are filled with the eerie bark of foxes. And it really is a bark. If you don't see them, then you will have heard them. Whether you see them as a nuisance, maybe you see them as a welcome friend in the garden, my next guest is on hand to tell us all about them. Their characteristics, their nature, and where they are very popular. And less so. Adele Brand has written The Hidden World of the Fox, which contains a wealth of first-hand experience, from fostering cubs to filming them everywhere, from wild forests of Poland to the deserts of India, and also on her own trail cams, which are at home here in England. I'm so pleased to say Adele Brand joins us on the afternoon show. Welcome.
Thank you.
When I said that you were coming in to talk about foxes at the top of the show, immediately all these emails come bouncing into my inbox. And in fact, we've got an illustrator who said, I'm listening to your show, Joe, drawing foxes. And when you came in, I said, what is it? Why do we hold them for such affection? And you came out with a great answer. I'm putting words in your mouth. Go on, Adele. What did you say?
I think there's a lot of reasons why foxes really touch people's emotions, but one of the things that has been very apparent to me is they're almost a gateway back to nature for people who perhaps don't have the opportunity to go out and see tigers and lions. And nature is not something that happens somewhere else. It's here with us, and the fox is an indication of that. And
your book has proved it. They have so cleverly adapted. You know, I don't know if you heard my story about seeing one outside here with a Waitrose bag just staring at me. And I just thought, God, not only are they surviving, they're really healthy in Urbania, aren't they?
Yes, they're incredibly adaptable species. And yes, if England was still like it was 6,000 years ago, we would be wildwood and foxes would be following wolves around and eating deer, which wolves have killed. But they are a species that just adapts to whatever happens to the world and whatever habitat they encounter. And basically they're just treating city as the same way as they would a mountain range or a desert or a forest. It's just a new habitat which provides what they need, and they've settled in here.
Can we talk about their ruthlessness? My granddad, was a farmer in Sussex, and I can remember it was my job to lock the hens up. And you know what's coming. When I was a kid, I didn't, for some reason, lock the hens up. And what we were confronted with the following morning was obscene. And I can't think that a fox did it through hunger, because it was too cruel what he'd done. Or she or he. I mean, who are the hunters, male or female?
Both.
And do they do it like a cat will play with a mouse for fun? Or why do they ruthlessly wipe out a pack of hens or birds?
Firstly, I think anyone who's had that experience, yeah, it's terrible. I fully appreciate that. But what is happening is not quite what it seems. It's almost the same mentality in a fox that we have when we go to Tesco's, and we don't just buy one slice of bread because we're looking to get all the food that we need for the following week. I mean, foxes come from a world in which they can't be sure where their next meal is, and the instinct is just to grab as much as they can. Appreciate that's still very distressing for the chicken owner, so by far and away the best thing to do is to fox-proof your run before that happens, and that will keep your birds safe and also keep the foxes out of trouble.
My granddad would say, he'd sit on the step and he'd say, there's a fox, I can smell it.
Yes.
And none of us could smell it. I mean, is it possible? I mean, they're mangy quite often, but can you smell a fox?
You certainly can, yes. Mange is not necessarily as common as people think it is. A lot of times people come across a fox that's having a bit of a bad summer raising the cubs, or is just molting from its winter coat to its summer coat, and it will not perhaps look like it's on the front cover of National Geographic, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's got mange. But in terms of their odour, yes, you can smell it if you sort of get clued into it. It's really hard to describe. It's sort of similar to skunk, which I guess isn't going to help many people, but it's much milder than that. And yes, they use that to help mark their territories and just let other foxes know where they are.
I said in my introduction that because I really want to talk about the ones in the Strand, which I'm fascinated, which you've written about in the book. I mean, I didn't know there were any down there, theatre land. But can we talk about the ones in Poland? Did you go to Poland to study them to write this?
Yes, I made an effort to go to that forest in particular because eastern Poland has some of the best wilderness, so to speak, left in lowland Europe. It's got some
and is that
very
where you'd sorry, I'm butting you, but is that where you'd see them at their most natural habitat?
Yes.
Not with Waitrose bags in their mouth,
Absolutely.
where they're literally scavenging and they're living off the land.
They are, yes. The forests there are pretty much intact. They've got most of the wild animals that would naturally be there. They've still got bison and wolves and lynx. So foxes are interacting with all those species.
What, bison? Would they bring down a bison?
No, certainly not. But
but could they bring down an animal bigger than themselves?
No, they don't. They tend to hunt. Most of their diet is actually field voles, which are small animals like mice. The biggest animals that they're likely to catch are hares, and they will take very young deer fawns. And I'm talking very young deer fawns, but although they do eat a lot of deer meat, those are deer and wild boar which have been killed by wolves.
Killed already, by wolves, and they
Yeah.
just tuck in. What did you see? What was different to their behaviour in Poland in woods and forests to the ones in the Strand? I mean, is there probably a lot of difference in the way they look?
They look very similar. I mean, people sometimes suggest that urban foxes are becoming a separate subspecies almost, but there's not really any scientific background to that. In fact, foxes all the way across Europe, regardless of where they're found, do sort of cluster together genetically quite a lot. The foxes in Poland, the biggest difference really is the fact that they do have access to the food resources that our foxes have lost. So you find fox scat over there, you'll find it's full of wild boar hair, which obviously they can't kill a wild boar. Again, that is because of the interactions they have with wolves. And it's people often have this impression that wolves are just big fox hunters, and they're not. They tend to normally leave foxes alone, but they feed foxes quite extensively.
So let's talk about the Strand, because you say it's early on in the book you write about it, and you say it's never quiet. There's never peace in the Strand. It's 24/7. So when did you see these foxes?
I found evidence of them there, and I had reports from some of the people who worked in there that they had also seen foxes. And it is amazing how they find these little gaps in the landscape and between buildings in just quiet corners, and they manage to live.
Because it's like when I said I found the one out here, there's not a garden in this area. There's balconies, no garden. There's Regent's Park right the way down the road, but I don't think that one came from Regent's Park. So where are they living? In the Strand, where are they living?
They will find little corners which might be quite hard for a person to get through. They might be just the other side of a security gate or something like that. They are just amazing at this talent of finding little refuges in a very busy landscape where they feel safe.
And this, I was saying the cliche is as cunning as a fox. Are they?
They're incredibly intelligent and adaptable, and they will use whatever they come across in the landscape. And I mean, I was camera trapping a fox in a fairly urban area on one occasion, and I caught one walking off with a toy dinosaur. Anything that they find, they will take an interest in. We've all seen the footage on YouTube and Facebook of foxes jumping on trampolines. So then play in adulthood and animals is something which comes out in species that are very intelligent and capable of learning their whole lives. So yes, they are cunning in that sense, but it's
but
more.
I think, and I'd love to know if you ever do a head count, because I just think now they are everywhere in this city, and they have no humility. The one with the Waitrose bag, I stared it out, and I remember on my granddad's farm, they would run if they saw you. These ones here in W1, they'll just stare you out, and you think, right, who's giving in first, you or me? And it just took its time and gingerly walked past All Saints Church. I don't know where it went, but they are brazen, aren't they?
With foxes, they operate by what scientists would call a flight distance. So basically, they've worked out in some areas that they can run faster than we can. They're not bold or brazen. If you try and walk up to them, most of them will, unless they're used to being hand-fed, will bolt. And they will know gaps under the fence. They will know places that they can get to, and they're trusting in their ability to do that. I would say that when I've been to areas of really deep in the wilderness, the foxes there have no fear. It's actually not. And I've found them walking around Canadian parts of Canada in the middle of the day. That is how they live. And people in one of the largest Canadian national parks have told me that they've been walking down trails there and had foxes just stroll straight past them. They're not stupid animals. They're not going to run and waste energy unless they think is necessary.
I love that. They're not going to waste energy, right?
Yeah, foxes are pretty lazy on the whole.
Are they? Are they? That's interesting because just before you came in on a Thursday, we always do a whole hour dedicated to dogs because I love dogs. So we cover every subject to do with dogs. And, we've had dog behaviourists in saying how clever is the dog that it allowed itself to be domesticated. It almost encouraged us to domesticate it so that we can't not live with them. We pine, we grieve, we rely on them. Medical detection. I mean, they're support dogs. Do you think when you read about foxes coming and lying by people's fires, people coming downstairs and there's a fox lying in front of the wood-burning stove, do you think they're desperate to be domesticated like the dog was?
It's a really interesting point, and I hope that some foxes will always be wild foxes. I think it'd be interesting to come back in 30,000 years and see how the fox-human relationship has evolved.
Well, they're moving in, aren't they?
Yeah. Interestingly, there's a few sort of archaeological discoveries where people and foxes used to live closer together in the past. There was a really interesting dig that was done in Spain earlier this year where they found a human burial site, but foxes buried alongside it. And they did some analysis of the fox bones, and they were able to determine that these foxes were actually having the same diet as the women, but not as the men.
So they were pets?
Well, they might have been pets, so it might have just been that the women in that particular place fed foxes.
Just fed them.
Yeah.
This is, right, so I'm going to read through these. These are emails that have come in about the urban fox. This is from Andy, who's actually listening online in Devon and not in London. Since moving to Devon some 4 years ago, I've seen a dozen foxes in total. When I was in Purley in London, I'd see that many on every journey home. They'd often just look at you, then run away if you shouted at them. The worst were a pair who had coitus outside my bedroom window in the spring and would be screaming like somebody was murdered. My mum also had one that would put its front paws on the outside of the window ledge and look into the house, staring at her. The ones down here in Devon are in much better condition than the mange-ridden vermin that I see in the suburbs. So many points there. Why are they so noisy when they have sex?
I think your correspondent's actually misunderstood fox behaviour. The noise that they make is not sexual. It's often two foxes arguing, and they don't mate at that time of year. The females are actually only receptive for about 3 days, and that usually peaks in the first 2 weeks of January.
Do they mate for life?
They don't mate for life. They will stay together as long as both of them are alive, more or less, but genetic analysis has painted quite a complicated picture. So even though the vixen's only receptive for a few days, she sometimes manages to have more than one mate. So, yeah, they do talk a lot. Not everybody dislikes that. I think you have to only look at Yelvis and all of the publicity.
Nature.
It is nature.
It is nature. This is Sadine. It's probably jealousy. I'll throw that in. This is Sadine, who says, I live in southeast London and live alongside foxes. When I first moved in, I was charmed by their presence and would often wake up to see 7 of them playing in the garden. And the cubs were so cute. Whilst I can appreciate them as beautiful-looking species, the charm has now worn off and I live in fear of them. I have a gorgeous garden that I don't use as they just appear and don't ever respond to me shouting at them. They also poo in my garden and that leaves such an awful smell. I really wished I could love them. I tried to embrace them, but I just can't.
There's no great reason to be afraid of foxes. The risk of having a negative encounter, a serious negative encounter, is vanishingly low. They are much smaller than they appear. 12 to 13 pounds would be normal. In terms of the droppings that they can leave in gardens, there's an element of tolerance here because as I say, nature is not something that happens somewhere else. It happens with us, and we can't expect Kenya and India and places in South America to tolerate much more problematic wildlife if we're going to object to having a fox walking across our lawn.
Very good point. So I don't think you're going to like this. This is from Mary. Joe, not everybody looks at foxes with affection. When I was in charge of customer services at a housing association which took calls from residents on repairs and other problems, there would always be people ringing in about foxes. As a result, I became the fox czar in getting the information for the staff and then explaining what to say to irate callers. Most callers hated them, didn't want them in their gardens for reasons of noise, poo, threats to pets, and perceived threat to babies, which I'm intentionally not asking you about, and young children, turning over bins, digging up lawns and plants, fear of disease and fear of fleas. Some people asked, can you send that bloat round to shoot them. Oh my God, I can't read that anymore. I mean, it's just what you said, isn't it? This intolerance to anything that doesn't fit the norm.
Yeah, it is intolerance, but I commissioned an opinion poll company to actually look into all this in more detail because, yes, there are people who do say things like this, and they're often very vocal. But what we found is when we took the population as a whole, is only a minority of people who feel like this. Most people do either like them or have no strong opinion either way. And although intolerance of foxes is higher in London than it is in the rest of the southeast, it is still a minority.
Do they spread disease?
It's not very likely in the UK, no. I mean, certainly, we all live alongside foxes, and you're not,
Well, in London, we're, what is it, never a foot away from a rat? And I mean, they do, don't they? So.
Yeah, and foxes hunt rats. They're one of the...
Do they?
Yes, they're one of the few
there
wild
you
animals
are,
that
everyone.
we have.
All of you doubting voices, they actually are hunting out rats.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. This is from Andrew in Islington. I can't tell you how many emails I've got. This is you. It truly does trigger a reaction, doesn't it? Andrew in Islington says, if you want to avoid foxes in your garden, just urinate outside and it works. Adele?
I'm afraid that's a bit of a urban myth. There's no
Thank
scientific
God, because we
basis.
don't really want everyone doing that.
No, and same with getting lion poo and putting that in your garden. There are commercial repellents that are on the market, which things like Scoot, which work to sort of disguise fox scent marking, and the theory behind that is that will make them uncomfortable and they won't hang around so much. In terms of human urinating, no. I mean, there's really very little evidence to back that up.
Final one that I'm going to read out is from Amelia. Don't talk to me about foxes. As you know, I live in Maida Vale. I have a medium-sized garden with a shed. They gnawed the bottom of the shed, then they burrowed underneath the shed, had their 4 cubs. In the end, there were 4 cubs plus the parents. They were there for ages, all hours, usually during the day. I had to have the shed removed as it was beginning to collapse. Yes, they are cute, but in urban areas, they've become vultures due to the fact that humans leave their garbage all over the place. Well, again, that's a human fault, isn't it?
Foxes can't get rubbish that's in wheelie bins. So if people put away their rubbish properly, wildlife is not going to get it. And to someone like that, I would say, please remember that might be your view, but your neighbour might love them, and the majority of people do value them, and they're a big part of their lives, and they are that gateway back to the natural world. Is really concerning when you look at the statistics of how disconnected people have got from nature. And foxes are one of the solutions to that. Get to know them, understand their world better, and I think you'll find a lot of your fears go away.
And read the book, The Hidden World of the Fox. It is absolutely fascinating, by Adele Brand. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.